blood pressure, cholesterol. People don't have to drive an hour and a half, of their time to see their doctor. They can just pop over to Jennings and go back to work.
Is the clinic still open in Avoca?
There's a
Nurse practitioner?
nurse practitioner that comes from Harlan, and I'm not sure how often they come.
Okay.
Those rural, so there are some satellite clinics
Holbert?
that are, I don't know.
Yeah, she used to be our neighbor.
Okay, so yeah, so there's that clinic, and I believe there was one in Trainer, and that's not staffed anymore.
Elkhorn has one.
Elkhorn, okay, that's a little farther out.
Yeah,
towards
they
Harlan.
spread around. There aren't many. And
Yeah.
you are right. Self-contained, you're
Yeah.
We have the same challenges in Colorado, obviously, and our basic strategy for keeping doctors in rural communities is getting them married off to somebody who's local.
Right.
Like if we can do that, we can actually get them to stay. Sometimes you're lucky and it's a doctor.
I started a scholarship at our school for that very reason. The guy or gal who's going to replace me is probably in that school right now.
Yeah.
And if we don't capture them and get them interested in staying, short of finding somebody to marry a doctor, I can't.
I mean, it's not a bad strategy.
It's not that. I wish I would have done
if
that.
you can achieve it, but it's hard to scale that.
Right. There's no grants. There's no federal grants.
Do the rest of you live in town too, or are you in the
In the county.
county?
Yeah, we live in Crescent, small town just north of Council Bluffs. Basically rural.
Thanks for coming over.
Yeah.
How about you?
I live in Council Bluffs. I'm social media chair for Pottawattamie County Democrats.
Great.
I live about 20 miles from here. I moved from Colorado about 18 months ago.
Oh wow! What brought you here?
Well, I'm from here originally, but I worked out in Colorado for several years, and I came home after I retired.
Where were you in Colorado?
Highlands Ranch for a while, and then eventually Broomfield.
It's pretty different from here.
I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, no traffic.
No stoplights.
Right.
I love no stoplights.
I was just looking at, I spent the night in Omaha last night, and I was looking, I always look up stuff about the place I am, and it mentioned that Omaha was the 40th largest city in America, which of course led me to look at the list to sort of see where Denver was, and it was amazing. I think that we're now up in the last 10 years, 250,000 people or 300,000 people in Denver, and you can, in the metro area, and you can feel it. I mean, the traffic is just incredible.
Is it top 10?
No, we're not in the top 10.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember what number it was. I was just struck by the overall number. Well, Jerry, should I talk a little bit about it? Do you want to say a word of introduction, or do you want me just to...
First, I wanted to mention, I have 4 brothers and 1 sister, and one of my younger brothers, he saw on a farm television show in Fargo, and
Really?
yeah, he said the announcer of the station, his sister is a senator.
Oh, yeah, Heidi Heidkamp.
That's the name.
That's it,
And, yeah, and he was very excited when he heard I was gonna get to meet you. He feels like me, very excited about your platform and the things that you want to accomplish. We're on the same page.
Yeah. No, that's exciting, because she lost in the last election, Heidi did. And she was a tremendous asset to our caucus, because she's a very, very no-nonsense, common-sense kind of person. And she was one of the people in 2016 who just couldn't overcome the Trump wave in South Dakota, Indiana, Missouri. I mean, we just lost those seats, and it was tough, because we lost some really good people, and she was one. But I've been in touch with her off and on during the course of the campaign. She tells me when I'm doing stuff wrong, right, and tells me when I'm doing things wrong. Well, maybe I could just say a word or two about myself, and then I'm happy to have a conversation with all of you about whatever you'd like to talk about. If I had to summarize the last 10 years of my town halls in the Senate, and almost all of which have been in Colorado, but now a lot in Iowa and a lot in New Hampshire, it's people coming to the town hall saying, we are working really hard, but we cannot afford some combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, and early childhood education. In other words, people are saying we can't afford a middle class life. And if I think about the families I used to work for in the Denver public schools, where I was the superintendent before I was in the Senate, it's about 95,000 kids, most of whom are kids of color, most of whom are kids living in poverty. What their families would say if they came to the town halls is something similar, which is, we're killing ourselves, but no matter how hard we work, we can't get our kids out of poverty no matter what we do. And taken together, I think that's a pretty good anecdotal reflection of an economy that for the last 50 years really hasn't worked for anybody except for the people at the very top. And I came to the view that if we continue to play the political games that we've been playing the last 10 years or so, that my generation is going to be the first generation of Americans to leave less opportunity, not more, to the people coming after us. And I think it is critical for us to run on a platform or an agenda or a set of ideas, whatever you want to call it, that people like Cindy Axne can actually embrace and run on, because that is how we are going to win. And I think that's how we'll get the White House back, because remember, there were 9 million people who voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. We need to get some of those people back. And we're not going to get them back just by promising a bunch of free stuff. I just don't think people are going to be tricked into that. I don't think they're interested in that. But I do think we can promote an opportunity agenda that focuses squarely on the issues that I just was talking about and win. So, reversing the Trump tax bill and replacing it, among other things, with a dramatic increase to the child tax credit and to the earned income tax credit, so we can actually make work pay again. That proposal of mine, which is called the American Family Act, Columbia University looked at it and said that it would reduce childhood poverty in America by 40%. It would end $2 a day poverty. So the kids that are living in households with $2 a day poverty, that would be done. And by the way, the cost of it would be just 3% of Bernie's Medicare for All bill. And you could say, look, we did something really meaningful. On health care, I've strongly supported, as Sydney has, a public option. I've supported that since we passed the Affordable Care Act, and I was there when we did that. And the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee was telling everybody, don't hold town halls. I had town hall after town hall after town hall, mostly in rural parts of Colorado, explaining why I was voting for the Affordable Care Act, what I thought I would do to be helpful. And I'm not saying I persuaded a lot of people, but I did have a conversation with people about what I was doing. And even then, I was leading the fight for a public option, because I believe that particularly in rural areas where you've only got 1 or 0 insurers, people need competition. And my bill, which is called Medicare X, actually starts in rural areas. And it says in rural America, if you've got 1 or 0 insurers, you have the public option available to you, a plan administered by Medicare that uses the Medicare reimbursement network and adds to it, obviously, doctors that are pediatricians and other things that Medicare doesn't currently have. And I think if you did that and you auto-enrolled everybody that is eligible for Medicaid, and the kids that are eligible for CHIP, which is the kids insurance program, in less than 3 years you'd cover everybody in America. 85% of the people are covered already. We just need that last slug. And for people that are making too much money to afford Medicaid, but not enough to afford private insurance, the public option is a great answer for them. Obviously, people that are on Medicare will stay on Medicare, in my plan. And more important than all that is the issue of healthcare cost, which isn't even being debated in this primary, really, but is the issue that people are concerned about, because they can't afford health insurance, they can't afford health care, and they can't afford the medicines that are prescribed to them. And there's work that we can do there. I've called, as others in the race have, for the government to negotiate drug prices to get them lower. education is another issue that you never hear about on the campaign trail, but I hear about in all the town halls that I have, which is an expression of the concern people have that the kids aren't getting the education they need, and that Iowa's not investing in education the way it used to.
We really lost ground.
Yeah, you've lost a lot of ground. Colorado's not investing the way we need to, and it's showing up. If you did a focus group out in America and asked people what does the Democratic Party stand for in education, what you would hear is free college. And my priorities are just different than that. As a former school superintendent, I believe in free preschool much more than I do in free college, and I think that we've got to figure out what to do for the 70% of kids that are graduating from high school, but not going to college, and who in today's economy can only earn a minimum wage. There's no reason why they should be graduating from high school without the skills to earn a living wage, not just a minimum wage. And we can do that, and I've seen it. You know, the apprenticeship programs we've put in place in the Denver public schools are giving kids the opportunity to spend 3 years working at an employer 2 days a week. They go to school 3 days a week. They graduate. They get a real job. They can get paid, and they're off to the races.
That's the sensible way to do that.
And we can do it all over America. Yeah.
I think Council Bluffs is starting. They had a big grant from a couple, and they've initiated what they call Trade Works.
Trade Works.
Yep.
Yep.
And they do just what you said.
Well, and it makes a huge difference because people are getting paid. I don't want to mess up the wall, Jerry. And then the final point, I'll stop, and I'd love to just talk with you about whatever it is on climate change, which I do think is an incredibly urgent problem that we have to deal with. Urgency is not enough. We also need a solution that will last forever, for a generation. And today in Washington, in our political system, what we've gotten used to is a world where I put my stuff in for 2 years, then the other side rips it out. I put it in for 2 years, then the other side rips it out. If you even get that. And I don't think that'll work for anything, but particularly climate, which is, requires a generational answer. So I was saying earlier, which is why I've proposed, in addition to the other things that the other candidates have proposed, which are similar to everybody's sort of similar on this issue, that we use the working lands of the United States to conserve carbon. So we're paying, farmers and ranchers to change their practices to sequester carbon in the soil. That could create a real win-win for everybody and make a big difference on both the politics of climate change and also the durability of a solution. And the final point is just that we got to reform the way our democracy works, and there's so many things we have to do to take the money out of politics and put people in politics. Everything I said, I don't want to be presumptuous, but my guess would be every single thing I just said Cindy could run on, and Abby Finkenauer could run on. And it's not more complicated than that. That is the way I think that we can beat Trump and win a majority in the Senate and win states like Colorado and Iowa and Maine and Arizona and North Carolina. But if we don't run on an agenda like that, we could open ourselves up to losing to this guy again, which I think is just simply inexcusable. Think about this guy just for a minute, and I'll stop. This weekend, or this last weekend, a week ago, if anybody that works in Council Bluffs or anywhere had spent the weekend tweeting out the stuff that Donald Trump tweeted out last week, they would be meeting with HR on Monday morning. And HR would be saying, you better stop this, because if you keep doing this, we're going to have to let you go. And then if he said, oh no, don't worry about it, I'm a stable genius, or he said, don't worry about it, I have unchallenged, unmatched wisdom.
I'm the only one that can.
He'd have his box, of things, and he'd be out the door. Yeah, and meanwhile, while he's doing all this stuff, just last weekend alone, Iran announced that they had doubled the
concentrators.
Yeah, what is the word?
Uranium.
Enrichment. That they doubled that, and that China had signed a trade deal with a bunch of countries that together comprise 50% of the GDP of the world, and we're nowhere, which is the cost of having a person in the White House who doesn't understand what he's doing. China's an interesting case because he's now put us in this position where you know, he can cut a deal with China that looks, that, you know, he's gonna say is great for farmers, whether it is or whether it isn't, and declare victory. And so China is now in the position of basically deciding whether they want to give him that victory. And I'll bet you what they're thinking to themselves is, be a good thing for us if this guy were in the White House for another 4 years, because we can continue to have the influence that we're having all over the world. Anyway, I deeply appreciate your being here. I particularly because I know you know I'm not high in the polls. I just think that somebody who's in that 0 to 3 range is going to be part of the folks that come out of Iowa. I don't think people have made up their minds yet, and I'd be interested in your perspectives on that. But I believe that, and I just think the agenda that I put forward, and that not for the campaign, but over 10 years of representing Colorado in the Senate, is one that is more aligned to what people in Iowa are kind of looking for than a lot of the things that I'm hearing on the debate stage.
You're still in the trenches, you aren't?
Oh yeah, no, I'm in the trenches.
I mean, with us, in this, we're after the same, hoping the same things are achieved, yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of really important things out there that I've been hearing about, but one thing that I find really pretty important, but probably a little bit farther down, why as a country are we accepting all of these lies continually in politics? And I find you very honest. But why do we continue to accept that? And what can you guys do to try and put an end to it, or at least curtail it some, because it's out of control.
It is out of control, and it's going to doom our democracy if we don't start contending with reality and contending with truths. When I have kids come visit me in Washington, I often ask them, and I always love it when they come, because half my day used to be in schools, and which is a good place to spend your time, and I ask them always, do you write papers in your school? And if the answer is no, then we have a whole different conversation. But if they say yes, which they usually do, I say, well, tell me about that. Do you have to do your research on the internet? And they say, yeah, we do. And I say, do you have to distinguish between edited content, and curated content, which I define for them and tell them here's what curated content means, versus just somebody shooting their mouth off on the internet. And they say, of course we do. Why? Because if we don't, our teachers will fail us. And that middle school standard of how you should treat your papers is the minimum we should be expecting of our politicians, I think. And we're not getting that out of them. I mean, just look at this whole impeachment thing. They will, on any given day, they'll say whatever it is they could say that'll defend the president, whether it has anything to do with reality or not. And my view is that it's not just about us, the politicians, it's about all of us saying that standard of political discourse is going to destroy our democracy and is not going to give our kids the answers that our kids are going to need, which again goes back to the question whether we're willing to be the first generation to leave less opportunity, not more. I mean, I started out this whole race by going home and talking to my kids, and my wife, Susan. We've got 3 daughters now they were 9, 7, and 4 when I first ran in Colorado, and now they're 20, 19, and 15. And the 15-year-old, I said, the words were barely out of my mouth when she said, "Oh yeah, you should run." And I thought, well, that's great. I love that vote of confidence in my ideas and everything else. And then it became obvious during the course of the conversation that she saw it as a way to keep me out of the house during her 15th year.
Yeah.
But the 20-year-old said, "Dad, if you run and you tell the truth and you lose, no one can fault you for it." And I said to her, "Caroline, that's good, because there really is no other reason for me to run, and there's no other way for me to win." And every single one of the candidates met with the Des Moines Register editorial board here over the last few months. And after I met with them, the headline on their editorial said, "Michael Bennet pounds truth into this campaign." And then the end of the editorial said, "Even if you've committed to another candidate, you ought to give Bennet a look, because he's describing the nature of the challenge we're facing and how to get out of it different than any of the other candidates." So I'm trying to do it in this race, and I think we should be demanding it of all of the candidates, because if what you do is simply give people a bunch of empty promises that never can get accomplished, that's only going to breed its own cynicism. And the last thing we need in our system is more cynicism. So we have not figured out how to deal with the lies on the internet and the social media, and it's corroding our democracy.
And the Russian trolls, yeah, democracy's failed from within. And
They do.
people think
They do.
it's their man, and you say, like Sinclair Lewis, it can't happen here.
That's right.
It cannot happen
Yeah.
here until it happens.
right.
Once it happens,
Yeah.
then you can't get them out.
I read half that book.
Yeah.
I didn't read the whole thing, but his description of, the candidate, it can't happen here, basically.
Can't happen
Is a
here.
description of Trump, a Trump-like character
Yeah.
in the 30s, and the description of the rally at Madison Square Garden where there are these brown shirts and all this other stuff.
Oh, it hits home, but all this stuff, in the Danish community I grew up with, they said, history recycles. And if you support one, you are one. And when you look at things that go on, taking the babies is one that I use. We take babies away. We're only gonna shower them, but they never come back. We don't even know where they're at. And I tried to work with my brother for 3 years. I said, my mom grew up in 20s and 30s Germany. And he just won't believe anything. He's no homework. He wants to buy this new car, and he looks at it, and it's so fine till you wash it the first time. You see it's got flaws, but they don't go that far. And he and a lot of people don't look back that far. They don't remember Big Joe McCarthy and Roy Cohen.
Right.
They don't remember. It took Eisenhower a long time to say anything about these lies, but they won't acknowledge that this taking babies away. And when they say it over and over and over, a lot of it sticks. These lies stick because they want that new car. But my dad was in a command unit with the 3rd Army, 20th Corps. He drove a truck, moved General Walker's staff. Well, when they came upon Ordruff, which was up by Gotha, they were told not to touch a thing, and Eisenhower wanted to come and see the first one because he couldn't really understand it. So these people, 6th graders, they hadn't been past 6th grade, took pictures, and I've got a picture of Eisenhower, Bradley, Patton, and then General Walker going through there. And the people are walking through there, and people still on the gallows, and they're telling Eisenhower, we didn't know the camp was here. Well, Eisenhower didn't believe it. How could they not know, right? They used fake news. That's what they said in these 6th graders wrote down. The people were told in the newspapers that no camps existed. There weren't any of these camps. Yeah. And so it just repeats itself. And what you brought up about the budget, take away the tax cuts. Kansas cut taxes. Finally, the government ran out of money. Well, the Republicans are still in charge, so they got to raise taxes.
Right.
But if the Democrats get in and we do the right thing, we stand up and be the adult in the room, what are they going to say?
Yeah.
What they've always said, tax, spend,
Right.
tax, spend. The Freedom Caucus, my goodness, could care less about.
It's
They
amazing.
don't care about deficits as long as it can be for them.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
And their record, including Steve King's, their record is terrible.
Steve
Nope.
King, if you haven't
Nope.
seen that documentary, Hidden Workforce, it's all about his district.
Really?
Those farmers up there, the ruby red voters up there, they say, we want people to work at Tyson Foods. Storm Lake is 50% dependent upon
Right.
undocumented. The
Yeah.
whole northern Iowa, a lot of those towns.
What's it called? Hidden work?
Hidden workforce.
Hidden work.
And they go right on. This Minnesota milk producers comes right on, and they're up in that border area, Iowa, and Tyson Foods as well says, we offer these jobs, and we cannot find Iowa born and bred, Minnesota born and bred people that will take these jobs.
So have you seen the like have you been to Texas? Have you seen where they're
I haven't.
holding people who are
I
trying to
haven't.
come in undocumented?
No, you go right
I
on.
haven't
No,
been
right on that. I'm
Yeah,
curious.
I haven't been on the
No.
border. I have been in Denver. There's a facility that's housing parents that were taken away from their children, so split away from their children. But to sort of tie these two threads together, my mom was, and her parents were Polish Jews who survived the Holocaust. They lived in Warsaw, Poland. My mom was sent away from her parents. They were all split up. The whole family was split up. She was told her parents were killed, and they got back together after the war. Everybody else in the family was killed except for an aunt. They lived in Warsaw for 2 years. Then they went to Stockholm for a year. Then they went to Mexico City for a year. And then they finally came to the United States. My mom was the only one who could speak any English at all. She enrolled herself in the public schools there, and I've never met a person in America who has a stronger accent than my grandparents had, and never met anybody who were more, stronger patriots than they were. That's how it's supposed to work.
Exactly.
And that was why I felt so grateful to have the chance in 2013 to be on the Gang of Eight that wrote the immigration bill in the Senate. I wrote it with 3 Democrats, and McCain led the Republicans, and we had 3 Republicans, got 68 votes, pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people that are here that are undocumented, the most progressive DREAM Act that had ever been written. I wrote the agriculture provisions of that bill with Marco Rubio and Orrin Hatch and Dianne Feinstein. First time that an immigration bill was endorsed by the Farm Workers Union and the growers all across America. It had $46 billion of border security in it, which everybody has forgotten. Not $6 billion, but $46 billion. And it allowed us to see every inch of the border with 21st century technology. It wasn't Trump's medieval wall, but it was 350 miles of what he now calls steel slats, and which is what they're building down there now. Plus, we doubled the number of border control agents. All of that stuff. I mean, Lindsey Graham used to say they'd be able to hold hands on the border. There were so many of them. And why is that not the law? It's not the law because Steve King and 40 guys in the House of Representatives were able to basically have a veto on the thing even coming to a floor vote because of this rule called the Hastert rule that was named after a guy who's in prison now, who was the speaker, that says you have to have a majority to pass a bill on that. Well, how undemocratic is that? And so they frustrated the will of the majority. They kept the issue alive so that they can continue to do the kind of demonizing, and then Trump gets elected and separates kids from the parents at the border. My mom called me the day that happened, and she said, "Michael, I see myself in these children because I was separated from my parents." And that's a whole lifetime worth of damage that's being done down there. And then on the fiscal stuff, these guys are the biggest hypocrites that ever walked the face of the earth. I mean, I went back there at the same time Barack Obama did, and when he was elected president, I was appointed to the Senate, and I had to run right away in 2010. Terrible year for Democrats, but I barely survived. But we were trying to do the Recovery Act back then, and they were just saying, "You're a Bolshevik, you're a socialist," to Obama, who, by the way, Bill Clinton left a surplus behind of $5 trillion. Bush cut taxes in 2001. He cut taxes in 2003. When he cut taxes in 2003, we had already gone to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So not only were we not funding those wars, we were actually cutting taxes. Then he did Medicare Part D, which he didn't fund. That was at the end of his. So by the time, and then we had the Great Recession because they provided no oversight. So they took what was a projected $5 trillion surplus, and in 2 terms of Bush, they turned that into a $1.2 trillion deficit. And then the worst it got with Obama was $1.5 trillion, and by the time he left, it was at $600 billion. Now it's at $1 trillion again, going to $2 trillion. And you got unemployment going like this and the deficit going like this. That almost never happens. It's impossible.
It's not a national security problem.
And what has caused it? Since 2001, we've borrowed, thanks to the Freedom Caucus, $5 trillion from the Chinese to give the richest people in America tax cuts, and we have borrowed another $5.6 trillion from the Chinese to fight these wars that never end in the Middle East. That's what we've done, and that's 11 or 12 or 13 trillion dollars that we could have invested in the country, but we basically lit on fire from the point of view of investments in the country. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running, because I think we need some new priorities here. I mean, there's a guy from Indiana, not Mayor Pete, but another mayor from Indiana, who wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post when they were passing Trump's tax bill saying, let me just make you understand what you're doing. It'd be as if I went out in my city, my little town, and I borrowed more money than any mayor had ever borrowed. And he said, well, maybe if I was using it to fix infrastructure, if I was using, no, but instead I'm going to take the money that I borrowed and I'm going to give a tax cut to the richest neighborhood in my town. That's what you've done. And it is what we've done.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over again. And you're right, their playbook is going to be, because now we're at a point where we're collecting 16% of our revenue of our GDP in revenue. We're spending more than 22%, and that difference is the deficit. And when somebody gets in there who can actually start to address it, they're going to start saying, well, you're, a socialist and Bolshevik, you're raising our taxes, but you can't, I mean, the next generation, I mean, what we're doing to them is, you got that gap, and every year that gap creates more debt because you can't catch up. So we're at $22 trillion today, going to 30 trillion, and we've cut by 35% the investment in the next generation, which is why they can't go to college without taking out 20 years worth of debt. And it's why when you look around and see the infrastructure not being invested in, or there's not a medical practice, or there's not a primary care nurse, or there's not a mental health provider, or there's, all that stuff is a consequence of what I just described. Anyway, you got me going.
Nobody yet. Go ahead.
But do you see addressing the tax issue with any special attention to that handful of families that make more or that control more wealth than 50% of the
I do. I mean, I think we have to figure out what it is, because I think Elizabeth's tax is probably not constitutional, but you can definitely take rates up on those people, and you can take them up higher on the people that are the wealthiest among us. Closing the gap of the capital gains rate with ordinary income, that is a really egregious place where people are paying much less. The wealthiest people are paying much less because their return is on capital and not work, and we should equalize that, I think. And that we have these massive transfers of intergenerational wealth in America today that are basically being transferred tax-free at this point. And that's creating a permanent aristocracy in the United States. And it's so much money that you actually could get a fair amount of money out of it if you're willing to do it. Of course, what they'll do is say, well, you're trying to tax every farmer and rancher out of existence. And every time we try to do something like this, we lift the cap, or we make farmers and ranchers immune. And I think it's worth doing that just to get the politics of it right. But yeah, there's a lot we could do.
I think there's just a misunderstanding of people from people about wealth distribution in this nation. I mean, we hear numbers like that, but and people think that it maybe it's this sudden curve. You've got this poor class here, and then a middle class, and then these wealthy. But it's not. I mean, as a physician, I tell people this all the time. As a physician, I have more in common with the drug dealer who lives at home in terms of wealth generation and wealth control in this country. We have far more in common than, and I'm probably sitting in that 80 to, I'm in the 20%.
Right.
When you get over to the 10% and the, maybe we have something in common, but when you get to that 2%, it goes from, it's an exponential spike.
You are exactly right. It is not even, it really, I mean, if you look at this I agree completely with Bernie on this. If you look at the top 0.1% of Americans, that's about 120,000 households. And that 120,000 households has as much wealth as the bottom 90% of America.
That's right.
So half of Denver has all the wealth of the rest of the continental U.S.
Yeah. And that's crazy.
Yeah.
And it is, to your point about exponential, it literally is exponential.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, if you look at it, basically what's happened is, it's really not even the top 20%, as you were just saying.
Yeah.
It's the top 10, top 5, top 1, top 0.1. In each one of those lines, the 0.1 goes off like this, off the chart like this. The top 5 goes off the chart like this. The top 10 goes off the chart like this. But below that, it's pretty much like this.
Right.
You know, there's some really interesting books about that. There's one called Dream Hoarders that I read. It's about people that are in the bottom half of the top 20% and how their lives are so challenged, because on the one hand, they're not getting the benefit of the top 10%, and on the other hand, they will do anything they can to keep their kid out of the bottom 80%, because they know what happens to their kid the minute they drop down there. And so that is, I mean, this goes back to something I was saying at the very beginning. This is exactly the consequence of 50 years of no economic mobility for 90% of the American people. That's what this is, and what that looks like in a human's life is the inability to afford a middle class life, or the inability to get your kid out of poverty, and that's got to change. And if we made the tax changes that I've suggested, if we put in place paid family leave and we raise the minimum wage, I mean, those things alone are not sufficient, but that's a huge reversal from what we have been doing for the last 20 years.
And there's a lot of people in my economic class, my spot, that turn and look at that 80% below and say, everything that goes on in this country to help you is the reason of the problem. You're the problem. But the reality is we're just that, we're one paycheck away from that. That we've got to convince folks who are in that 80% that this isn't about it's zero cost to us in real dollars to help the people who are just trying to keep their kids out of poverty. If you're going to go for the money is to the right. It's
And
1%.
and the democracy requires us to do it, because the democracy can't survive if you have the kind of gap that we have. I mean, the gap, and by the way, the gap we have is the largest it's been since 1928 in income. And that was a time when we had another Gilded Age, and just, I mean, it's not the same Gilded Age, but this is a Gilded Age. And in that time, they had a progressive reform of fighting to get women the right to vote, and ending the appointment of senators from state legislatures. They started direct, and in our time, we have analogous things we have to do. We got to overturn Citizens United. We got to end partisan gerrymandering in this country. I mean, King and these guys would never have been propped up the way they were propped up over the last decade if it hadn't been for Citizens United, which was decided exactly the same moment that they were beginning to react to Barack Obama's election. That was 2010. And in fact, my race in Colorado, there was more outside money spent than any other race in the country, and it was the first Koch brothers kind of place to play was Colorado. So and there are many ways that we can make it easier for people to vote. And by the way, on top of all of it, again, as a former school superintendent, we got to recognize the fact that our broadly stated, our system of education is actually reinforcing the income inequality we have rather than liberating people from it, because the best predictor of the quality of your education is your parents' income, because that's a pretty good predictor of where you're going to live, and that's a pretty good predictor of what the quality of your school is going to be. I mean, that has to change so that education can actually create mobility again in the country. So that's, and I think we don't achieve any of this without winning purple states. So it's not, I don't think it's about moderate versus progressive or any of this. My agenda, I think, is as ambitious as anybody's in the race. It's different because I think it's an agenda that can actually reach people in purple parts of the world. And you look at something like the public option, which Cindy and Abby are both for. of the 40 people that ran as Democrats last cycle in 18 and won House seats, 39 of 40 ran on a public option. 1 ran on Medicare for all.
You know, Cindy actually right now is fighting all the pharmaceutical companies and the healthcare companies running this ad. Don't you call Cindy actually and tell her to leave her hands off my prescription drugs. Don't let her socialize them. And that's a totally false ad.
Totally false.
Yeah, and I wonder why my elected officials, when they're talking about tax cuts and all the money that goes somewhere, doesn't emphasize that it comes from China. It comes from China. This is Chinese money. We don't have the money to give to these people. And
No, right, that's what we're doing.
the Ruby, Steve King and Donald Trump are actually helping. I've tried for 3 years to just move the needle on my brother. And it really hasn't worked because he's hooked. But my brother called me and said his wife, who would vote for Iraq if it had an R on it, is tired of Donald Trump's,
Really?
Trump's behaviors and Steve King's. She will not vote for Donald Trump, and I've heard that in the schools.
That's really good news.
Well, but she would be one of these suburban women that live right outside of Omaha in a little Ralston. And she's one of these women, and you get little rays of hope on that.
Yeah.
But then you listen to some of these other people that should know better. Oh, it was, he's not even have a consistent enough policy to collude or to, you know, I mean, it's just crazy, but I
But
think
that goes
there are
back
little...
to your point about, you know, the lies and the deception here.
And the misinformation.
And the misinformation.
But it isn't a recent development. I was just thinking last about the Orson Welles, the War of the World.
Right.
Yeah.
That was 80 years ago.
Right.
And
Right.
he had everybody convinced. But, I mean, it's just, how do we sort it out?
It's going to be hard because there's a big difference between radio and the internet. You know, the radio, you can switch a dial, but it's not divided up into increments like social media is, and people can, you know, I mean, you spend time with people that are, you know, spend all their time listening to the same stuff in some dark, far reach of the internet somewhere that doesn't have anything to do with reality. And by the way, in addition to the issue of integrity and honesty, what about just the example we want to set for our kids? I mean, Trump last time, you know, in Iowa said, mocked John McCain who had spent 5 years in solitary confinement and whose captors were saying, you know, we know your dad's a big admiral, we're going to let you go. And he said, I'm not going to do that. I have to go in the order that people came here. And yet it got repeated over and over again on Fox television. It got repeated over and over again in people's neighborhoods. When if anybody's kid said that about McCain, you'd watch their mouth out was sober, whatever it is you do in 2019. And if your parents said it, you'd be embarrassed. You'd say, they're not coming to dinner the next time.
One other quick question, and I've been seeing this, and I haven't heard too many people talk about it, but I just kind of wondered if this is really happening. Is it seems like there's an erosion in the checks and balances. When he was elected president that night, I wanted to throw up, but I thought there's some checks and balances in process that maybe are going to stop, or but it just seems like to me that what happened to those, even with the you know, the House, you know, the Democrats having control of the House, it's just out of control, and it doesn't seem like anybody can do anything to stop what he's doing.
Well, we got to keep trying, because hopefully, as evidence comes out of what happened, there'll be Republicans that, you know, that decide they're going to stand up for the Constitution. But it hasn't happened yet. It's true. And if we're living in a vortex that's been created by the media and Fox and others, when you think about Watergate and when that happened, in the end, the checks and balances worked, and it worked the way it was supposed to work. When you replay the that era with Fox News, and imagine people 24 hours a day saying it was a coup against Richard Nixon, that the Democrats put the tape on the door at the Watergate, that G. Gordon Liddy was a great American patriot. I mean, the list is long of things you can imagine being said, and we're in uncharted territory. And the thing that I keep hoping is that people are going to realize that their reputations in the end are going to be based on whether or not they act in the interests of our country and our Constitution, not in the interests of Donald Trump.
Will they do that in the Senate?
What?
Will they do that
I
in
don't
the
know.
Senate if you become the jury?
I think it's a mixed. I think today you get a. McConnell predicted the other day that if the vote were today, that he'd be acquitted. And
Sure it would.
he's probably right about that.
And that, it can't happen here, right?
You got to get the American people to have a sense of just how out of sort of bounds and out of whack this presidency is. I mean, if you look at something like what he did in northern Syria 3 weeks ago, when he abandoned the Kurds, I think it's quite possible that you could make the argument that that was the weakest foreign policy decision that any American president has made. And how people can justify that or defend that, I don't know. I don't know how Steve King defends that.
My brother was in Vietnam, and when that pullback happened, he said he is really upset. 3 days later, when Trump said that, it's going to save lives and that, he echoed that. My Fox News friends that view Fox News could care less that Shep Smith left and the other news.
Sure, they probably
They
think
could
it's
care less.
good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance.
Right.
And that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Sorry,
But I think in the end, I mean, go ahead.
well, it just concerns me that we saw the legislative bodies refuse money for building the wall.
Right.
And then we saw the president
That's right.
behave in a way that was contrary
Absolutely.
to their powers.
Exactly.
That's right.
So, I mean,
You're right.
can we close the bank
You're
account? Can we? I mean,
Thank you so much.
that worries me.
You're 100% right about that, and you should be worried. What are the two senators from Iowa doing, voting to support, that fake emergency declaration?
Right.
What in the world are they doing? Because the next time that there's a Democrat there, and they declare some emergency, then what are they going to say?
I fear people are getting to the point of, short of uprising, our government is, all the checks and balances are out the window.
Yeah.
I really get a sense of that.
It's going to come down to the people. I mean, it will come down to the people, and it always
right.
does. It's the opposite of Donald Trump ran saying, "I alone can fix it," and that's the opposite of how it's supposed to work. But we're all going to have to stand up for it.
That's a great message.
We're all going to have to. We're all going to have to do it because it comes down. It really does come down to us. I tell people all the time. They think about. I'll spare you the gory details, but I describe the things the founders of this country did in their generation, but they also did something terrible, which was perpetuate human slavery. It took other Americans to end that, like Frederick Douglass and others. And then I think of those people as founders, just like the people who wrote the Constitution, just like the women who fought for my daughters to have the right to vote. And actually, when you think about what the role of a citizen is in a republic and a democracy, we're really refounding it all the time. And that is our job, and it is our responsibility, and we're going to have to figure out how to overcome it. And I think the only hope is to get people focused on the next generation and our obligation and our duty to them. Because then you could say, like even the people in Colorado that I meet who voted for Donald Trump, and I say, why did you vote for him? And they'll say, well, because we wanted to blow the place up. And I'll say, well, congratulations, you achieved your objective, but now what are we going to do for our kids and our grandkids? What are we going to do for America's place in the world? And that is the thing we have to keep coming back to. And I think it's going to be vital for us to have a nominee in this race who can speak to not just the Democratic base, but to other folks in the country and say, it's time for us to figure out how to unify the country again, because that is what we have to do. Lincoln said over and over again, at the much more divided time than we're facing, he said over and over again, we must never be enemies, we must be friends. And what he meant by that is, in a democracy, we all have to be friends of the democracy. If we're not, we'll destroy it, because it is, in the end, an exercise in self-government. And that, by the way, exercise in self-government is what King has essentially immobilized. And his compatriots, they went back there repeating Sarah Palin's cartoon version of what the founding fathers were doing, not the actual version of what they were doing. And they've done a hell of a lot of damage, if you excuse the expression, since they've been.
Some of it can't be unwound.
I can tell I have to go do
Yes.
but nothing from me.
Yeah, well, let me go to education.
Okay.
You spoke on education a little bit, and you said it's very necessary that we get college education for kids.
Yep.
And you talked about that it's tied to income, or
Right.
being middle income. Well, also considering with that, that people in the 50s or so went to work, one man went to work, the husband,
Right.
and made enough income, like building Western Electric
Yeah.
in Omaha, that the man and wife and family could have a middle income.
Right.
Then it became, you needed two incomes.
Right.
Okay. So education was quite affordable at that time. I just about paid for my whole way through. My dad helped me with $1,300 in the end, in the 70s. But now, when the average is something like 50,000
Yeah.
being in debt, well, I could say, this is Bernie's point. I mean, would you take this up? Isn't it more important now that we, what we say, help our next generation who will be running and working for this country, so that, you know, our American way can go forward?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be more necessary that we, as a nation, help to pay for their education?
Yeah.
What do you
I
say?
I totally agree. I think I want to go back to something I said earlier, which is I think it's really important for us to be graduating kids from high school that can earn a living wage, not just the minimum wage, and you can do that without a college degree.
Yes, can you do that now without a college degree?
You can do that without a college degree. In some fields, you can do that without a college degree, but there are certain fields where you have to have a college degree, and for those, I mean, the fundamental problem is that college costs too much. You know, Bernie's plan to forgive everybody's college debt, I understand what he's doing. I mean, it's actually kind of a regressive policy that he's proposing because of who the beneficiaries are, but I understand what he's trying to do. The fundamental problem is that college costs too much. It costs too much. And we have stopped supporting higher education. When you were going to college in the 70s, the state paid for most of it. Taxpayers paid for most of it. And you could pay for the rest of it through, you know, a little bit of debt or a little bit of working your way through. And when you graduated, you were done. That's how it used to work. There's no reason it can't work that way again. And it should work that way again. I mean, people, the most common tears I get in my town halls are people that are dealing with healthcare issues. The second most common are kids that are dealing with debt issues. Last night I was in a brewery up in Sioux City, where the bartender started asking me questions because she was saying, you know, she was saying I can't get out of the jam that I'm in because I want to get a higher education, but I can't afford it. So I think what we need to do is reduce the cost of college, and it's going to be challenging for us to do it because of the way the federal government, the state government, and the colleges themselves are all related to this problem. And for people that already have debt, we should make it much easier for them to pay it back. We should allow them to renegotiate it so they can drive their interest rates down. And I think that that's more where people are than the sort of the idea of just having it be free. I mean, community college should be free, and there are universities out there that will be free, but I think that's a better way of approaching it than the way Bernie is approaching it. It is, but you put your finger. The one thing I'll say is this about all of this: if you are a kid born poor into poverty, and you can get that 4-year college degree, that is something that can take you from here to here. And that, you know, the problem is that the number of people that actually get that opportunity is so vanishingly small that it isn't yet making a difference.
We should.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
I want to put another point of view
Okay.
into this. What are you going to do to increase salaries of people coming out of college? I think there's significant statistical data on how people starting out of college are now much more reduced than, say, when I came out of college.
It's true. It's true. I mean, part
So-
of it is the changes to the tax laws that I mentioned earlier that would be a real boost to people's income when they're coming out of school. Part of it is as a whole, we should be focused more on taxing capital and less on taxing work. You know, we when people are paying, you know, you think about a company like GM, which still employs a lot of people, not nearly as many as it does. They pay a lot of taxes, and their workers pay a lot of taxes because of the way the payroll system is set up. Amazon, one of the wealthiest one of the wealthiest companies in the world, barely pays any taxes, and they don't employ a lot of people. So, and I think we've got to continue to invest in the country, so that invest in infrastructure, invest in R&D, invest in higher education. You know, these are the ecosystems that in the latter part of the 20th century propelled our economy forward, including for young people in the country. But if you're not investing in the country, if we're instead just giving tax cuts to rich people or fighting these wars in the Middle East, you're fighting it all with one arm tied behind your back.
Well, when you get out of college and you get that first job, what you're getting is what you should be getting as a minimum wage worker, because what the salary you're going to bring down is probably 50,000. That's going to get you a 2-bedroom apartment, utilities, and then you've got to pay your student loans. But statistically, over the past 30 years, the starting salaries of people coming out of college have been significantly reduced. And this ties into labor unions. Their benefits have been decreased.
Right.
And when you decrease those benefits, you have decreased everything all the way up the line.
That's true. I agree.